Welcome to America Stands. I'm Gene Bailey, along with Greg Stevens. How are you, Greg?
Gene, how are you? Good to see you.
And also there in our Studio B, Tim Fox. How are you, sir?
Good, sir. It's good to be with you again. Let's get this thing started.
Yeah, all right. So we're 96 days away from the big election, and we've got lots of ground to cover. And tonight we're going to get started with a lot of things happening. Pastor Greg, I'm going to go around the room here and get your take. Where do you think we're at? Did you think, first off, we would be at this place 96 days out from the election?
No, I really didn't. Of course, nobody could have foreseen the whole pandemic happening and all the different things. The riots, I'm old enough to remember 68.
1968.
And so I see some similarity in that. But to see our nation as divided as it is, I didn't expect that.
Tim Fox, what about what you see going on in the world today? How about the polls, Tim? I know you track the polls. Do you believe what you're seeing out there?
No. In fact, you can't really believe the polls as you see them. And Gene, I just want to bring it back down to a simplified formula. This is sports analogy, by the way, keep your eye on the ball. A lot of what you're seeing going on in the country is certainly important, but this election is very important, and we need to keep our eye on the ball, and that's what this program is about, to help you understand the important issues that we're facing in America and how we as believers can attack those and help make this country and keep this country in a great place.
Tim, when you started talking about the polls there, I remember 4 years ago, at this time, the president was 10 points down to Hillary Clinton, and he's inside of 10 points now with Joe Biden, isn't he?
He is, depending on the poll you look at. But yeah, he's definitely within the margin of error, like they say. And so, there's a lot that's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 months. And it's going to be really important that we stay focused on the important issues and the issues that this program will bring before you, the issues of life and the issues of religious freedom. Those are the things that you need to keep in mind because you're going to hear a lot of things from both sides and don't pay attention to the polls. The only poll that really matters, Greg and Gene, is the one that happens on November 3rd, the one where you go to the polls and when you vote. That's really the only one that matters, and that's the one that we have influence over.
Yeah, amen to that. And let me say, speaking of November 3rd, we will be carrying election coverage again in the Spirit of Faith live right here on Victory Channel and all of our outlets. You want to make sure you watch. We start at 6:30 Central that evening. We'll be going behind the scenes. And some of the things we've been working on, Greg and Tim, since our last election coverage in 2018, we've ramped up a lot of our data, a lot of our graphics. We have access to a lot more graphics now with the Associated Press and a lot of things that we're able to actually bring to you on a quicker basis. And a
direct feed, direct results.
Direct results. We will be among the first to get results. We will definitely be having that. And of course, in 2016, America Stands may have been the first news outlet that actually called the election. We did call it for President Trump back then, and I believe we're going to have a good night that night. Of course, David Bart, Michelle Bachmann, the whole team's back with us, and a few surprises along the way. But between now and then, over the next 96 days, you're going to be seeing more on this network from us, the team, special guests, as we break down what's going on in this election process. Now, you talked about COVID-19. How do you think that's really affected the process for how we're voting now?
Well, I mean, it changes. You have the Democratic Party now wanting everybody to do mail-in ballots, which I don't know that that's a good idea.
Right.
But it remains to be seen, but it has changed the mindset of a lot of people. And you spoke of guests a second ago. We've got wonderful guests with us tonight as well.
Yeah, you want to make sure we're part. Before we get going, let's check in with Mike Grafalo in the latest news break. Mike?
Thanks, Gene. With the coronavirus pandemic and the recent flare-ups in states like Florida, the only place Republicans will be gathering from August 24th through the 27th for the Republican National Convention will be in Charlotte, North Carolina. As the president said about a week ago, Jacksonville is now off the table and will not be happening. A 4-night Republican National Convention celebration had been expected to attract more than 10,000 people to the Sunshine State. As the president said when he announced the cancellation of Jacksonville, the timing is just not right to hold such a large gathering. So now in Charlotte, a small subset of GOP delegates will formally renominate Donald Trump on August 24th. The event is scheduled to last just 4 hours. The president does still plan to deliver his nomination acceptance speech, most likely from Charlotte, in some yet to be determined form, possibly even online. As for the Democrat National Convention, Committee Chairman Tom Perez said it will still be held from the 17th of August through the 20th in Milwaukee, but it will be scaled down in a smaller venue and be mostly virtual. Perez said safety will be job one. And while the delegates will cast their votes for Joe Biden remotely, the former vice president is expected to accept the party's nomination there in Milwaukee. The DNC was originally scheduled for July, but it was pushed back to the week before the RNC due to concerns about the coronavirus. So while the conventions will clearly need to be made for TV events, possibly the most anticipated part of the campaign will be the debates. Clearly, at some point, Joe Biden will have to come out of his basement, talk to the media, and debate Donald Trump. But if that doesn't happen until the first debate, then that reawakening won't take place for 2 months. First face-off that was supposed to be held on September 29th at the University of Notre Dame due to coronavirus concerns has been moved to Cleveland, Ohio, the very same date. According to the Commission on Presidential Debates, that debate will now be co-hosted by Case Western Reserve University and the Cleveland Clinic. The second of 3 debates was also moved and is now set to take place in Miami on October 15th. And while the third and final debate will be held in Nashville on October 22nd. As for the presumptive Democrat nominee taking questions from the press, Fox News, which aired a Chris Wallace interview with President Trump this past Sunday, said it made the same request to the Biden camp, but it was told the former vice president was unavailable. Back to you in the Victory Studio.
Well, thank you, Mike. You know, Pastor Greg and Tim, I think it's interesting. We always wanted to wait for the conventions to see all the pomp and what might happen or could happen, or, brokered conventions and all that. Well, now that's like...
There's the impact of COVID.
There's the impact of COVID right there. But now, never before has a debate been so crucial.
Oh, yeah.
And they're talking about basement Biden coming out and really having a debate. And by the way, we're going to cover that right here on Victory Channel, America Stands. We'll be covering that. You'll be able to watch for response to the debates as we go through the evening.
Joe Biden ran for president the first time in 1988. I was talking to our floor producer here. He wasn't born yet.
Yeah.
He got out of that race because of plagiarism. He was caught in a lie, and then he ran in 2008. He got out after Iowa with 1%, and then he's running now. And he's been known for some gaffes, and so they've been protecting him. My concern, and we're going to talk about the vice president pick that he's going to make this next week. My concern is I truly believe, now this is my opinion, I don't believe if he were to be elected, he would be the president a year later. That whoever he picks for vice president will be. It's
why the vice president pick is so important.
Is critical.
Okay, so Tim, we've talked about the need to vote. Every election season, we're always pounding the promise to get out and vote. Make sure you vote, register to vote. Are you seeing anything change? You're in the political process. What are you seeing out there? Are people more motivated to go vote than ever before?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Gene. And I think, the president talks about the silent majority a lot. And I think, obviously what you're seeing in the nation, and of course, I made mention of this the other day, what you've got is the left wing of this nation, which controls the media in this nation. So really the whole narrative that you see is what they want you to see. And so you don't see anything positive concerning the president or his policies or what you and I and a lot of our viewers believe to be very important. But I do feel like there are people out there, because of all that we're seeing with the riots, and I'm not saying peaceful protests and riots, and Greg and I got into that a little bit the other day about the difference between those two, and there definitely is a difference. But what people are seeing, I think there's an unsettling nature to that for people. And I think if the average American, a friend of mine said this the other day, if the average American wakes up, then I think November, the results will be what we are hoping that they will be.
That's right. And I want to, thanks, Tim, I want to really kind of go back in history to some information I got today about the American Revolution. Because don't mistake, we're in a battle, we're in a war for freedom right now. In the American Revolution, 50% of the people did nothing. Of that, 37% of the people in America actually fought against us. They fought against our own people. 3% fought, and only 10% supplied the supplies to help this revolution. Yet we all look back and go, thank God for the American Revolution, what happened? But this is an example where good people sit by and don't do anything. We have to get up, go vote, and vote the right way. Vote for what your beliefs tell you to vote. Right, Greg?
The revolution was not, Tim Barton was on with us a few weeks back, and Tim was talking about the revolution is not what you see in the cities today, right. The burning and all. The Tea Party was done with permission. The governor was watching it happen. Yeah. And they did only what was the taxable tea. They left the rest of it there. They even swept and cleaned the deck of the boat. Yeah. So it's not the same thing as what we're seeing in our cities. All
right. Well, let's move along here. Let's talk about the vice president picks for Joe Biden, a Democratic nominee. Greg, why don't you run down them for us?
There's several. He produced a list, and commonly held there's 4 top ones. Kamala Harris from California, Senator. Susan Rice, who used to be chief of staff for President Obama. Karen Bass, she's a congresswoman from the state of California as well. And Stacey Abrams, who ran for governor in the state of Georgia. Now, I have a hunch who I think it would be, if he's smart, who he'd pick. Karen Bass has real strong communist leanings with Fidel Castro and Cuba. Susan Rice definitely has some name recognition. Abrams, I don't see that. I believe it's Kamala Harris myself. But there's some things about her. She's a fighter. I mean,
she's a scrapper.
A scrapper. She believes that we should extend all school days to 6 p.m. In other words, you would send your kids off in the morning to school, your kindergartner, your first grader, your second grader, and they don't get out of school till 6 p.m. I think it's detrimental to things. She prosecuted people as a prosecutor in Oakland for marijuana crimes, and then bragged about she partakes of marijuana. So she kind of has, her negative is she doesn't have a core. She'll flip-flop to whatever group that she says. I have an article here, if you remember.
Well, there's some details right there on the screen. I think one of the things,
former Attorney General,
she did serve on the Judiciary Committee with the Brett Kavanaugh hearing.
Exactly right.
And if you remember, she was quite vocal during all of that.
Yes, she was. Yeah. And that's her common thing. She's vocal. She remembered in the debate, she accused Vice President Biden of, I was that little black girl that was bussed in the bus and segregation. I have an article here right in front of me from Brian Anderson, June 28, 2019, the Sacramento Bee, and he gives some facts. He said, actually, she was in that second group, but the first black child in that school, Thousand Oaks Elementary, was a year before she was born, was in that school. So it was already not a fully segregated school. But anyway, so there's some little tidbits that she leaves out.
Yeah. Tim, I want to get your opinion there on who do you think, if it's one of those 4, who would you, if you had to make a pick, what would you pick today?
Well, let me say this, first of all, bouncing off what Greg had said about Harris's stance on extending the school day. All we would have to do on this network is tell all the kids that, and they would talk their parents into voting the right way. But I will say this. Let me give you this baseline, okay? In the news break today with Mike, you heard the name Tom Perez, who is the head of the DNC. He is quoted as saying, as a couple of years ago, that socialism is the future of the Democratic Party. We hadn't made that up. That is something he said. So when you use that as your baseline, every one of these people that we're talking about today as presumptive VP picks, they are all to the left. None of these, now, regardless of what they may say, they're going to tell you things and say things that might seem that they're closer to the center. All these folks are to the left. And what that means to you and to me is that they are not for religious freedom. They don't believe in religious freedom. We're seeing some of that right now in our country, which is being driven by the left. They are not obviously pro-life. We hammer that a lot, but that's an important issue. So whichever one of these people that you want to plug in there, just remember that that's the thing. And on Karen Bass, Greg even mentioned this. Just a few years ago, she referred to Fidel Castro, and I want to make sure I get this right, as Commandant in Jefe. And in English, obviously, that's Commander-in-Chief. So as Greg mentioned, she has some real communist ties there, and she's not the only one, really. I mean, all of these folks that we're talking about probably lean that way, Gene.
Even Elizabeth Warren.
Sure.
She was on that list. I mentioned that, my opinion. I'm not a doctor. I want to go on record for doing that. I'm not a psychiatrist. We're going to have one on the program in a minute. About Vice President Biden, but you're seeing the things that we've all been seeing. Yeah. But I'm using his words. He said, if elected, he's not running for a second term.
Right.
So whoever this vice president pick is,
right,
will be 4 years from now running for president.
Do you think that's his call, or do you think that's the Democratic Party that's saying?
Somebody called it. He said it.
Yeah.
And so he's already made the comment that he will be only for 4 years.
Okay. All right, Tim, set up our next interview.
Well, Gene, I recently spent a few moments with Autry Pruitt, who is an author, speaker, and a conservative advocate. He is also the CEO of a group called New Journey PAC. And let me read you what their purpose is. Their purpose is the realignment of the Black American vote with candidates that support conservative values. As I said, we spent a few moments with him recently. Here is just a portion of that interview. Autry, let's start by telling us about New Journey and what is the core beliefs of New Journey?
Thanks for having me, Tim. I'm so glad to be here. New Journey's core beliefs are that America is destined to be free, and that in order to be free, everyone has to vote their conscience and their actual beliefs. We have those in the country, primarily on the left, who have made a history, a battlefield, if you will, of making those, or individuals, I should say, be scared of actually speaking up and voting their beliefs. So James Golden started a PAC to basically say, no more of this, you're racist, you're bigot, you're homophobic, you're Islamophobic, all this stuff. Basically to say, you can vote how you want to vote, you can participate in the electoral system how you want to participate, and you don't have to be pushed back against, you don't have to be called a liar, a cheat, you don't have to be not let in school, etc. So that's what we're about, is actually allowing Americans, and right now we're focused on Black Americans in particular, but allowing Americans to be able to vote their conscience and speak up about their conscience as well.
Your website says, the Black American today embodies what it means to be free. Can you explain that statement?
Yeah. We believe that if you are a Black American today, think about everything you came through from the first Dutch slave boat in 1694 all the way now to 2020. Imagine that. All of what you've been through, your ancestors have been through, what you have access now. Before the interview, I just put down an over $1,000 iPhone. I go shopping in the great places of this country. I travel all of the world, almost like an old Roman citizen, knowing that I have the entire power, particularly now that Trump is in office, the entire power of the United States military behind me if something happens to me. Imagine that. I mean, there's no greater point of freedom than a person who once was in bondage, go back to the old Israelites, who once was in bondage and is now free. And that's what I believe we mean by when we say a Black American embodies everything it means to be free. Once to be in chains and now to be free. Once told you had to go do this and now you choose to go do that. And that's what I mean by African Americans today truly represent, every time you see someone who's Black and who's American, you can say that right there is American freedom. When the founders wrote the Declaration of Independence, I like to say they wrote that actually for Black Americans. They actually pinned down in that declaration all of the things to eventually erode slavery, erode Jim Crow, eventually to make us where we are today.
The Democratic Party platform. Do you see something that Black Americans conservative black Americans can embrace?
I don't see anything that any black American can embrace. Listen, the Democratic Party platform advocates the destruction of life. Let's stop at that issue. Any political party that advocates that with no conditions, and I'm talking about abortion to be absolutely clear, that with no ramifications, with no limits, you can go and kill a child, obviously does not protect anyone. Doesn't protect black Americans, white Americans, Irish, European, no one. So there's nothing that black Americans can identify with that is in the Democratic Party. Healthcare doesn't matter if you don't have a life, right? So that doesn't matter. Free choice, free school doesn't matter if you don't have a life. Free university doesn't matter if you don't have a life to live. If you look at it, black Americans have been aborted at a rate 10 times at least those of other ethnicities. That is an absolute tragedy, and that's what the Democrat Party advocates for. We have to really get that into our thinking, that we actually have a major political party that says, yeah, who cares? Who cares about that baby? Go ahead and kill it. That's horrifying.
Why do you think that message is not getting out?
I think that message is not getting out because the mainstream media doesn't want it to get out. The mainstream media holds it. The facts are that 83% of black Americans are actual Christians. And of that subset, roughly 70% actually attend church on a regular basis. Oh, the message is getting out, but it's not getting out in quote unquote mainstream media because they don't want that message out. Because all of a sudden, if the history of Planned Parenthood, if the history of Margaret Sanger, if the history of the Democratic Party comes out that we wanted to enslave you, and then when we couldn't enslave you, we want to kill you, then you have no votes.
Yeah. This November, Americans are going to have a choice. Can you tell me in your words how stark the difference in the two choices will be?
The difference is as stark as what I just said. The difference is you have a choice between life and death. That's it. You can choose life, both in the womb and outside the womb, or you can choose death. You can choose life when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to school choice, when it comes to prison reform. Donald Trump has done so much. President Trump has chosen life when it comes to prison reform. He has said those who have been locked up for nonviolent crimes for astronomical amounts of time, that when they get out, they have no other choice but to choose the life of crime again. We need to look at them as a society different and set them free. So he has chosen life versus Democrats time and time again choose death. I believe that is very, very pertinent for the African American community to understand. The liberal media, Democrats, and those on the left want you in digital bondage. They want you in physical bondage regarding your health care, regarding Social Security, regarding school system. And if they can't kill you in the womb, then they're determined to kill your spirit and kill your soul once you come out of the womb. And that is the choice you have today in this election cycle.
Well, I can hear some of you saying, as you're listening to that, I have not heard that anywhere. You're exactly right. That's why America Stands is your election coverage in the spirit of faith, and where you will hear things like that, and with our upcoming guests that have a lot of great things to say. And Gene, before I throw it back to you, I will say this to all of the folks watching. Autry mentioned in that piece about the platforms, and we've talked about the platforms on numerous occasions on this program, and we will continue to do so, by the way. But we will know more about the two platforms, the updated platforms, during the upcoming conventions. And I suspect that they will not change a whole lot, which means that one of them will be pro-life, pro-church, and one of them will not. And the decision will be pretty easy if you're looking in the right place. So keep it here on America Stands, because we're going to give you more of what you saw here with Autry. Jane, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. It was a good interview. Coming up, I'm glad you mentioned that, Tim. We will be covering, once the platforms are determined, we will bring it to you here on America Stands, right here on the Victory Channel and all of our network, and we'll put them out there for you to follow along as you go to the ballot box. All right, so next interview is with Dr. Dell Williams and his wife, Joy. Dr. Williams is a psychiatry specialist. He's primarily located here in Fort Worth. He's been in practice for more than 30 years. He's been associated with Kenneth Copeland Ministries for over 25 years. Now, you will probably recognize his wife, Joy. She sings on the praise and worship team for Kenneth Copeland Ministries, and of course, on Sundays at Eagle Mountain International Church. They're both politically active right here in the Republican Party of Texas. Welcome to America Stands, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so I want to jump right into this, Dr. Williams. I want to know, what effect do you think COVID's had on everything happening here?
Well, I tell you, it's been really difficult for everyone. It's been very stressful. We're seeing a lot of people in the emergency room because of people becoming very anxious, a lot of fear of getting the infection and spreading it to other people. Of course, people are stuck in their homes. They can't function. They're out of their usual routines. So this is really taking a toll, especially on young people. A lot of the teenagers are having a particularly difficult time with a lot of conflicts, a lot of frustration within the family. And so it's a difficult time right now. And I believe that we've really kept this going for much too long at this point in terms of keeping people in isolation. I think that it's starting to do more harm than it's doing good at this point.
What does isolation do?
Well, again, it really gets you very anxious. It can lead to really a syndrome that's akin to a post-traumatic stress disorder because of the anxiety that's there. But it can lead to also a major form of depression. People, especially with the financial stressors thrown on top of this, people losing their jobs, unable to keep their businesses. It leads to a lot of suicidal thoughts, a lot of drug use, alcohol in particular. Right now, we're seeing quite a bit of that as well. So people are trying to cope. There's a lot of dysfunctional ways that they're dealing with this.
Is the isolation something, because it seems to me whenever I turn on the news or any other network, there's you're seeing what's happening. There's like the tension is at an all-time high. And it seems like there's no middle ground. It's either you're with me or I'm attacking you. Is that from the isolation? Does that amplify that, or is it just the times we live in?
I believe that's part of it. I think the isolation is part of it. But I think another big part of it is right now that everything is politicized from my perspective, from what I see. And it's almost as if you don't see things my way, you're totally wrong, and we have to debunk you. Totally. We have to make you look bad so that no one else believes what you're saying. There's no civil discourse anymore. And a lot of that's because of trying to really trump one another in terms of who's right and who's wrong.
Mm-hmm. What about the anger? Because you see a lot of, if you've watched what they call protests in Portland, well, name a major city.
Right.
And they seem so angry.
Yeah. Well, some of these groups, that are part of these protests, I mean, there are peaceful protests, but there are also people who are violent rioters. Mm-hmm. And those people, a lot of those folks have been associated with Marxist groups and anarchy groups. And these are people, some of these people really hate America, let's just be honest. They're anti-America, and they want to see a disruption and a downfall of this country. So they have a motivation. They have something they're working towards, and they're trying to set up division in this country.
Right.
I want to play right now a clip from T.D. Jakes as he dives a little more into the Black Lives Matter and what's going on with that. So let's watch this. We'll be right back. Get your comments.
First of all, they have to understand there's a difference between the organization itself and the movement. The movement kind of took over the organization. It swallowed up the organization. I mean, it's in London. It's in Nigeria. It went all over the world. South Africa, they were running around saying Black Lives Matter. That's not one organization controlling that. The slogan overrode the organization.
There you go.
So it transcends the organization. But some people have dug back into the organization and realized that the organization is extremely liberal. It is very secular. Rights for transgenders, LGBTQ, so forth and so on, some things that Christians would not agree with, mixed in with Black Lives Matter and the issues that hopefully most Christians would really care about, the abuse, the criminal justice system, the killing, and so forth and so on. So what happens in this country is once we find a reason to disassociate ourselves, we use that. So it could be, what is being said is, so we're not going to have anything to do with Black Lives Matter because they're liberal and they're against what the Bible stands for, and we're not going to do it. What ought to be said is, if you feel that way, let's start a right-wing counterpart that cares about the same issues, that embraces Christian values.
Yeah, amen. All right, I want your comments on that. What do you think? The disassociation comments there?
Do you mind if I'll go first?
Yeah.
Really, part of my I'm a big fan of Bishop Jakes. I've been in his church several times. I'm a fan of his. But I totally disagree with him on this because Black Lives Matter, if you go to their website and you find out what they really stand for, they're not just liberal. Liberal and conservative can have disagreements. That's fine. This group is a Marxist organization, and their founders have been down to Venezuela and supported the leadership down there. They've been outright in terms of their promotion of Marxist agenda, and they're also against the family unit. The patriarchal family unit, that's on their website. They want to defund the police. That's not going to help black communities. I mean, less policing in the black communities is actually going to hurt blacks more than it's going to help. So I really disagree with Bishop Jakes in this regard. The slogan itself, if Black Lives really mattered, we'd be looking at major causes of black death. You're looking at unarmed blacks being killed by the police in the numbers of 20 or so per year, whereas you look at 6,000 or 7,000 black-on-black crimes that lead to murder each year, or the 20 million deaths by abortion that have happened over the last, since the 70s. So I totally disagree with him with regard to his perspective.
Well, I hope you don't mind my first saying we want to send our condolences out to the Lewis and Kane families, and we're praying for you.
Yes.
I think this whole agenda is divisive, in that it's not just Black lives. This has started way back when Lucifer did what he did, and this is all to divide and conquer. The whole concept of kingdom living, the whole concept of living holy, being just like Christ is under attack. This is how I view this. I don't see this as black and white. I don't see this as heterosexual, homosexual. I see this is far, it reaches further than this. This is about protecting the freedom that Jesus Christ gave to us. And these are just ways of attacking that. That's the ultimate goal here, and that's my take on it.
So if you say all lives matter, though, you're called a racist.
Yeah. Well, again, with Joy, I agree with what you just said. They're trying to set up all this division. You can't say blue lives matter. The police don't matter, even if it's a black person in the blue uniform.
Exactly.
And yet, I've seen on some of these video clips, some of these BLM members who 60 to 70% of them are Caucasian young kids that you come from middle class and upper middle class families, calling blacks all type of derogatory names.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like back with the Klan, calling blacks all kind of things, and it's okay for them to do that from their perspective, because they're in the right. It's all about division, and to be honest, this whole racial problem that we're talking about here, racism to me is more of a human concept. It's a man-made concept.
Yeah.
This is sin. And we need to deal with it as sin.
Right.
And I haven't heard enough people talk about that aspect of things, especially in the church. Now, I expect the world to handle it in terms of a humanistic way.
Yeah.
But in the church, we need to look at this as sin and deal with it as sin from that perspective.
Right.
So when you say sin, explain. I think there's people that are going, sin? What do you mean as sin? Explain.
Well,
can I answer that?
Oh, please.
God gave us dominion over the earth and not each other. See, that's the big deal here.
Yes.
We, as human beings, have taken it upon ourselves to set up a caste system where I'm better than you because I'm this or that, this or this, and that's not how God set this up. If the earth was set up as the kingdom is, as Jesus as Lord and Savior, we wouldn't have all of this.
That's right.
See, but we've set up the Republican Party, the Democratic Party. We have all these different things we've set up. If there was one kingdom with one king, just think of that, how everything would change. Now, I understand, we have to have our policies and the things by which we run our lives. Laws are here to protect us. I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying we have to look above what we see here. This is not what's really going on. This is an attack. And that's my personal opinion. This is an attack on the reason why Jesus came in the first place, to teach about the kingdom and kingdom living. This is how I perceive that.
Yeah, and Paul wrote that we wrestle not against flesh and blood.
Exactly.
And yet that's exactly what we're doing when we talk about this whole racial issue. We're wrestling against flesh and blood instead of the spiritual attacks that are coming.
It's very much spiritual.
We need to focus, to me, on those aspects of what's going on more than anything.
Exactly.
Wow.
I want to go to Tim. Tim, I know you've been sitting here listening to this interview since you're still with us. Dr. Williams said something about the whole Black Lives Matter really going back to a Marxist type government or regime is what the agenda they're pushing. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Oh, it's absolutely. He hit the nail on the head there, Gene. And you look at these words that we throw around, communism, socialism, Marxism. We're in a position right now in this country where a lot of people are hurting. We've talked about COVID, people out of work. People look to someone to take care of them. And the answer that we have for that is that Jesus will take care of you. But the narrative that you hear is, let government take care of you. And I just want to caution people, and I'll just bounce this back to you all. When you let a government that will take care of you will eventually control you. And this country was built on the idea of individual freedoms. And that goes totally against everything that we believe. And you guys correct me if I'm wrong, all of those different isms that I mentioned, they are to eventually control your life.
Yeah. That's absolutely right. Franklin said, whatever you give away, whatever liberty you give away for security, you'll lose.
Absolutely.
I'm paraphrasing it and not getting it right. I'm going to mention a name, and you'll probably know this name, but I mentioned it to a lot of people, and they've never heard of this person, and I think it's a shame that we've never heard of Burnell Trammell.
Yeah.
Have you heard of him?
Yes, he was killed last week. He was assassinated, and it's unfortunate because in Milwaukee he was a Trump supporter. He carried the Trump sign and had wore a Trump cap. And for blacks who dare to, I'm going to use this phraseology, get off the Democrat Party plantation, there is a lot of animosity, a lot of anger, because we are people who look at the world differently, and we're looked at it as sellouts, as Uncle Toms, as a traitor to our race, regardless of why we choose to look at things different politically. The reason Joy and I look at things conservatively as we do, because we believe in life. We believe in the sanctity of life. That is very important. We believe in family. We believe in the God-made patriarchal type family. And we believe in supporting Israel. I mean, those are three major things that we look at. And from that perspective, politically, there's only one way that we see that makes sense. And so, but if unfortunately, because of the peer pressure and that sort of thing from the black community, if you don't agree with a lot of what they're saying, you're going to catch a lot of anger and even death now at this point, because things have elevated.
Doc, we even talked about it, how brave you are to come on here and today, and I thank you for that, for speaking the truth. But the fact that I would have to say how brave you are for coming and speaking what you believe has me gravely concerned about my country. And that's why this election matters.
Yeah, you're right. In fact, even on social media, I know there's a lot of people right now that are concerned, don't want to say something, they may not agree. So this is back to your comment, Greg, about the silent majority that are sitting there going, oh boy, look at this place is going crazy. But, at the same time, they're afraid to stand out. So it really is unusual when someone is willing to step up and say, no, this is not right. All right, I want to let's move along here. Recently, Attorney General Barr had to testify. I want to play just a little clip of his testimony. Watch.
In the wake of George Floyd's death, violent rioters and anarchists have hijacked legitimate protests to wreak senseless havoc and destruction on innocent victims. The current situation in Portland is a telling example. Every night for the past 2 months, a mob of hundreds of rioters have laid siege to the federal courthouse and other nearby federal property. The rioters have come equipped for fight. What unfolds nightly around the courthouse cannot reasonably be called protest. It is, by any objective measure, an assault on the government of the United States. As elected officials of the federal government, every member of this committee, regardless of your political views or your feelings about the Trump administration, should condemn violence against federal officers and the destruction of federal property.
I have a question for you, Tim, back up there in Studio B. Watching, I didn't get to see all of the testimony, obviously, but the clips that we saw, it was pretty amazing how Attorney General Barr had to defend himself. It was a very much hostile environment.
Well, he did, and the very end of that clip that we just showed, he called for the senators to denounce what we've been seeing. And I will tell you, Gene, that it was crickets in that room. No one stood up to denounce what's going on in our country. And, the First Amendment gives us the right to peaceful protests. I don't think any of us would disagree or argue about that. But when it gets over into destroying property, hurting other people, and yes, as Doctor said, even killing people, that's not peaceful protest. That is rioting, and that's not protected under the First Amendment. So it was really interesting to watch the Attorney General there and what he had to deal with. In fact, he even said at one point in that exchange, look, this is a hearing and I'm not even being heard. And that's really where we are right now. It's that cancel culture that we talk about so often.
Tim, I saw that. That's the thing that stuck out in my mind. And I encourage people, go back and watch that testimony. Get online and watch that, because it's supposed to be a hearing to hear from him. And they would cut him off, and really they should have just done a cardboard cutout like in the baseball games and let everybody just yell at him and do speeches, because they wouldn't listen to him. I don't know what it is, Dr. Williams, but when I was a kid, we were taught to respect people in authority and leaders. I remember being in the Air Force and different presidents, you saluted the office of the president. What has happened that we've lost that civility in society?
Well, I tell you, the political pressure has, really made people to react viscerally. Right now, I believe a lot of what's happening with liberals and with parts of the Democrat Party is that they feel like they have to intimidate us. They have to scare us into making our votes in the way they want us to vote. So that they think they want us to believe that if we don't vote the way they want, they're going to come and storm the gates on us. And that's, it's an intimidation factor is the way I see it.
Yeah.
Intimidation goes to your authority, and as believers, we have authority.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so if you can intimidate me out of my position of authority, and an example, the words that we speak. If you can intimidate me from using my mouth to proclaim what the word says, then you've won. Right. There's a Pastor MacArthur there near LA, is my understanding, who's having church services, and God bless him because he's opened up his church in California, despite the edicts of the governor there, Newsom. And he's preaching the word, and they're coming to that church. Yeah. And we have that freedom regardless of whatever the government says. The First Amendment gives us the right to assemble for church and for freedom of speech.
Yes.
And yet the government now is suppressing that. And the Supreme Court last week, especially with the vote of Judge Roberts, decided to vote against the church opening up in Reno. And so It's really
sick. A casino can be open.
A casino can be open, yeah. I mean, it's when you can gamble, but you can't go to church, there's something wrong.
Well, the church is peaceful assembly. That's what the First Amendment is. Congress will make no law, Tim, you know this, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion and peaceful assembly. I mean, church is pretty much peaceful assembly, isn't it?
Yeah. That phrase right there is the one that has been twisted from way back when, the separation of church and state. That's where that statement comes from, and it's completely out of context. What you said there, Greg, is what that means. Peaceful assembly. Congress shall make no law. It doesn't mean they didn't want the government making it a religion. They wanted to be able to religiously, worship God on their own terms, and it's been turned around to separation of church and state.
Well, so we wouldn't have a national church, the Church of America.
Right. And the only place that term, separation of church and state, shows up is in a letter from Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Church. Yeah. And he said that there should be a wall of separation to protect the church from the government.
So that they can meet. I mean, the Baptists were persecuted at that time. Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot, if that's okay. You are a psychiatrist, and earlier I gave my opinion, just observing the presidential nominee, Vice President Biden. You want to chime in on that, of what you've observed of him?
Sure. He seems to be having some struggles, obviously. I'm not going to diagnose or try to treat him or anything like that from afar, but I would love to see him go through a battery of tests, just like President Trump just went through. Because I think that would be something that we as Americans need to know in terms of, if he's a potential leader of the free world, we need to know his capacity to function. So I would love to get those results from testing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I have a question. As we enter into this time now, it seems that most Americans, I'm talking about blue-collar Americans, the heart of America, they are in shock. There's a shock going on because they're going, wait a minute, we had a president that we thought, and here, first it was George Floyd and COVID, and we're trying to keep up, and now I'm like, well, I want to obey the laws of the land. So when we sit here and say, yes, the right to assemble yourselves together, like you said, Greg, that's a real challenge to our thinking, because it's like, wait a minute, we want to do good, we want to be good citizens and obey the laws.
Right.
So it seems like time has been compressed, and suddenly we're dealing with things that even less than a year ago we wouldn't even be considered that we'd have to deal with, like standing up for your rights in the government, about going to church, of all things.
Right. Well, when the church is not seen as an essential function, as an essential business, if you will, there's something real wrong with that, because the spiritual component of the person is the most important component. I deal with the mental and psychological as well as the physical, but the spirit is the most important part, because you can break a person if you can break the spirit.
Yes.
You can take their will to live.
Yes.
And their reason for living. And so that's what's happening now. People are suffering out there because, I heard a stat that said the average American believes that 30 million people have died from COVID. Now, that's amazing to me, because, the actual number is around 150,000, which is a lot of people, but it's nowhere near 30 million people. That's 9% of our population. And so the news media is playing a role here, all the medias, in terms of the internet as well, Twitter and all that stuff. And the government is really fear-mongering at this point.
Yes.
There's been a lot of misinformation, flat-out lies by some of the physicians who are in charge of this whole thing, where they've admitted to lying. And I can't, personally, I don't want to work with a doctor that's lying to me.
Sure.
I don't trust you anymore.
Yeah.
So, and I don't trust the direction that they're heading in right now. And it looks like, obviously, to me, there's other agendas involved with this that are political. And so we're going to have to make some grown-up decisions, as the church.
Yeah.
Because we're supposed to have authority and control and dominion over our area. And so we're going to have to take it. That's why I really like that Pastor MacArthur there in California. I'm his new fan.
And I'm a big fan of his, but there's over 3,000 pastors in California that signed a pledge. We are having church. And I know several of them, friends of mine, that are holding service. And some of them are holding services on the beach, Gene.
Sean Foyt, is doing
I'm telling you, they're...
Yep.
It's breaking it.
And I think if there's a hope here in the spirit of faith, since that's who we are, is even all of this stuff, and I totally agree with you 100%, that there's this desire to control, desire to beat you down, yet in the middle of it, there's a revival happening on the beach.
Amen.
People turning back to God.
Amen. Well, things are getting compressed, as you said. They're getting difficult. People are going to need to know which direction to go to.
Yeah.
We need to be that light.
Yes.
We need to be right now, it's really amazing because I deal with some patients, I see patients as outpatients online, that sort of thing. And a lot of those patients are watching church online. It's helping them. Yeah. And people who weren't going to church, they're plugging in because they need something.
Yeah.
But I think we need to work towards opening the doors back up now too. That's an entryway, but we need to open the doors and have that physical connection. I know you guys have experienced it. Going to church online is totally different than being there with, being able to associate together, and to love one another. And we need that. But that's part of our humanness. That God made us that way.
Relationship.
And I hear a lot of believers that are in fear. They really are.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you're a psychiatrist. What do you tell a patient that's experiencing fear and anxiety?
Well, really that's more in your realm because fear, there's a spirit of fear.
Yeah.
And fear is the devil's greatest weapon. I mean, he wants us to believe the negative and to believe that, God doesn't love us. Yeah. He's not going to come through for us, that's all lies.
Yeah.
He has to twist. Fear is faith. Fear is the twisted faith in believing the negative. And so, you have to, number one, get the conscious part of your mind to understand that. You have to realize that. And then you have to, meditate on the Word of God. Yeah. I've read over 365 verses that have fear not in them in the New Testament. So, there's one for every day. We gotta, it's like taking a shower. I'm at work, I'm exposed to a lot of COVID patients, but I will pull out Psalm 91 in a minute. I've woken up in the middle of the night recently, and I had to get Psalm 91. I'm thinking, is that a cough I have? Am I warm? Am I?
I've done that.
Yeah.
Have you done that? We've all done that. Even Tim, he's probably done that. So, can I ask you a question? How did you start off conservative and all, or did you?
No, not at all.
What was the transition? How did it happen?
Well, I take that back. Actually, most black families are conservative.
Right. That's true.
We have conservative concepts. We don't believe in abortion. We believe in the traditional family unit. A lot of us are Christians. I think the stat that Autry mentioned was like 80% of blacks are going to church, that sort of thing. So we have, or Christians, and we have that concept, but we've been trained to not vote our values, okay? Because the Democrat Party did a great switcheroo back in the 60s when LBJ decided to vote for the civil rights legislation that passed. And it only passed because the Republican Party passed it. The Democrats, mostly from the South, voted against it, which was to be expected. When I grew up here in the South as a kid, I saw the racism. I grew up with it. I saw it. For some reason, people believe that because of that signing of that amendment by LBJ, that it made the Democrat Party the best party to follow as black people. But LBJ and JFK both voted against the same type of legislation in the 50s when Dwight Eisenhower brought it up. So, it was political opportunism. It worked out in terms of the timing for them. A lot of blacks started following the Democrat Party after that.
Interesting. And so that was your transition moment?
Well, no, actually, I guess I was rather confused. I still had conservative values, but I really didn't switch until about the early 90s, late 80s. I got into business with some business partners that really helped me to change my mindset, and I began to realize I needed to vote my values. I looked at I literally looked at the campaign platforms of these parties and realized, okay, I don't agree with any of this stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
But I do agree with this stuff.
Right.
So I had to change.
How about that, Tim? Do you, voting your values, I think that's a great line. He just said, what should people do if they want to vote their values?
Oh, my goodness gracious. Well, obviously, you go back to the Word of God, and what does the Word of God say? And then we've talked about it on numerous occasions on this program tonight. You look at the platforms, and how do they line up? How does the Word of God line up to those? Now, look, they're not perfect, and neither one of those platforms is completely with the Word of God, but I can assure you one of them is a whole lot more closer to the Word of God than the other. And I will say this, we've been talking around this point and even mentioned the word hate. Dr. King said you can't fight hate with hate. You have to fight hate with love. And we, as the Church of the Living God, have the answer to that. We have love Himself on the inside of us, and that's how we're going to win this battle, is walking in love and showing people love Himself. Now, that does not mean sit in the background and let people run over us, but we can do what we need to do in love. And I will say this, Gene, you'll hear me say this quite a bit now between now and November. The President's getting a lot of blame for a lot of things right now. And the thing you have to understand is you have career politicians, mostly on the left, but even on the right, career politicians who have been in office 20, 30, 40, 50 years, who are blaming everything on the President right now. When the reality is, a lot of what we're dealing with didn't just pop up in the last 3 years. Let's all remember, the coronavirus did not start here. It started in China. A lot of the problems that we're seeing in the country now did not start with this president. They've kind of come to light, and some of them have come for whatever reason. But if you're going to want change in this country and you want things to get better, you don't keep going back to the same well that caused the problem. You want to go back and find the solution to the problem. And this president has done a lot of really good things in this country in the first 3 years of his administration. And I think it's just unfair that he gets blamed for a lot of things, but that's just the society we live in now.
That's right.
Tim, I'm looking at Joe Biden's website right now for his presidential campaign. I encourage you to go look at it. He's got a plan here for COVID. He's got a plan here for essential workers. Lift Every Voice, the Biden plan for Black America. Here's an agenda for women. Here's Central America plan. Here's a plan for empowering workers or for veterans. Here's Beyond High School. Here is Rural America. Here's Against Women, Violence Against Women. Here's education. Here's high schoolers. Here's Catholic community, LGBTQ, students, Black community, Latino community, Jewish community, Muslim community, Indian community. Everything's divided into groups. Mm-hmm. And we are the United States. And I think that's probably what this election is about.
I agree. We spend so much time looking at our differences, but there's so much more that we have in common. God didn't create races. That's a man-made concept.
Yes, it is.
And so we need to, we all come from Adam and Eve. And so we're all related. But Joe Biden, he uses this race stuff. And a great example was when he said, if you don't vote for him, you ain't black. Well, he said, I ain't black if I don't vote for him. And I don't consider Joe Biden the arbiter of who's black, whatever that means. Who cares? I'm a Christian. I'm a child of Jesus. I know God, so that's more important.
Yeah. All right. So, Tim, final words here?
Well, there has been a lot of great information on this program today, and I encourage those of you that are watching, go back and watch again and do some research on your own. And just know that fear is not the answer. Hate is not the answer. Love and faith are the answer.
Amen. That's right. Amen. Thanks, Tim. Thank you, the Williamses. Thank you, Pastor Greg. Listen, coming up next Thursday, August the 13th, will be our next program here on America Stands, and we're going to tell you a story about chaos in Chicago. It's a true story of what happened to people who owned a deli, and they were attacked and basically run out of town. It's a story you won't want to miss, coming up August 13th. Final comments, Greg?
Be involved. Be involved. Pray and be involved. Be involved. Search. As always, stay a part of here on the Victory Channel. News break, Victory Update, morning prayer, and we appreciate you. Until then, remember this: God loves you. We love you. Jesus is Lord.